only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850... Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and good evening, I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor covering State of the Nation tonight. Coming up, former Justice Secretary David Gauke, who is leading Labour's sentencing review, has made front-page news after claiming that the tough-on-crime policies have left prisons in crisis. He joins me in a moment. Meanwhile, Shadow Defence Minister Mark Francois will be joining me as the question of deploying British troops in Ukraine divides the country. And energy bills are going up, I'm afraid, by as much as £100 a year, despite Labour's promise to cut them. So is Labour's plan for green energy failing. Plus, as the Reform Party widens its lead in the polls, I'll be joined by the South African businessman Rob Herzog, who's thrown his backing behind Nigel Farage as he becomes a party donor to Reform UK. State of the Nation starts right now. I'm also joined by my superstar panel, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin McKenzie, and former Labour Party Special Advisor, Matthew Larzer. As ever, let me know what you think of the show and of life in general via gbnews.com/your say. But now it's time for the news bulletins with Katie Bowen.
Christopher, thank you and good evening. It's 1 minute past 8. These are your top stories from the GB newsroom. France is set to convene a second meeting on Ukraine tomorrow with European nations who weren't present at talks yesterday. NATO ally Canada has also been invited, according to diplomatic sources. That comes as US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have agreed to appoint high-level teams to begin working on a path to end Russia's war in Ukraine as soon as possible. A Kremlin delegate says the US and Russia had a positive, constructive 4-hour meeting in Saudi Arabia about the war. Lavrov added that the deployment of NATO troops in Ukraine is unacceptable for Russia. And speaking this afternoon, President Zelensky of Ukraine has reiterated that negotiations should not take place behind Ukraine's back and has delayed his visit to Saudi Arabia to not give legitimacy to the US-Russia meeting in Riyadh, it is understood. It comes as Sir Keir Starmer said at a meeting with European leaders in Paris that any Ukraine peace deal would require a US backstop to deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper discussed the situation this afternoon.
Well, we need a lasting peace for Ukraine that safeguards the sovereignty of Ukraine. The Prime Minister has met with his European counterparts and will be meeting President Trump shortly as well. Clearly, there can be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine, and there's a huge amount of work to be done. As the Prime Minister has said, this is an early stage in the process.
A brief breaking update from the Vatican. Pope Francis has shown the onset of bilateral pneumonia and his respiratory infection continues to present a complex picture, the Vatican said a short time ago. The 88-year-old pontiff has been suffering from a respiratory infection for more than a week and was admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital on Friday. The Vatican said in a statement that laboratory tests, chest X-rays and the clinical conditions of the Holy Father continue to present a complex picture, but that he remains in a good mood. We'll bring you more on that story as we get it. Kemi Badenoch and the government have responded to criticism from the Lady Chief Justice today, with the Conservative Party leader saying that politicians must be able to discuss matters of public importance in Parliament. A government spokesman also said that the Prime Minister has made clear that it is for Parliament to make the laws and for the government to decide policy. The responses come after the head of the Judiciary for England and Wales said today that she's deeply troubled by an exchange at the latest Prime Minister's questions between Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch about an immigration tribunal decision. During the exchange, the Prime Minister said a decision allowing a Palestinian family the right to remain in the UK after they applied through a scheme designed for Ukrainian refugees was wrong, and that Home Secretary Yvette Cooper had got her team working on closing this loophole. Kemi Badenoch raised the case, describing the decision as completely wrong. The Lady Chief Justice, Baroness Carr, said it's for the government visibly to respect and protect the independence of the judiciary. And some brief breaking news this evening. Rick Buckler, who came to prominence as the drummer for The Jam, died on the 17th of February at the age of 69, just weeks after the musician was forced to cancel his tour due to ongoing health issues. His bandmate Paul Weller has just tweeted that news. We'll bring you more on that story as we get it. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. Let's go back to Christopher.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Christopher Hope. Now, a new report from the Independent Sentencing Review highlights how successive UK governments' tough-on-crime policies have contributed to a rising prison population, leading to overcrowding and the early release of thousands of inmates last year. Now, the review, led by the former Conservative Justice Secretary David Gauke, criticised a knee-jerk decision to impose longer sentences without evidence that it reduces reoffending. But could this be a prelude to more early releases that we've been seeing from this government since it took office? And joined now by the man himself, the author of that report, the interim report, the former Conservative Justice Secretary David Gauke. David, welcome to State of the Nation. Great to see you again.
Good evening, Chris.
Is being tough on crime wrong?
I think it's right that we are really focused on reducing crime. The challenge is that a policy of increasing sentences isn't necessarily the right way to reduce crime for a couple of reasons. One, there are some cases, particularly if we're looking at short sentences, where a short time in prison will result in a higher reoffending rate than being released and having a community sentence. The second point is it's indirect, if you like. What we've seen over the last 30 years is a huge increase in the prison population. It's essentially doubled over that time period. And that is not cheap. The average cost for a prison place is £51,000 a year. The government has committed to spend £10 billion on building more prisons. And the difficulty with this is a pound spent on more prison places is a pound you can't spend on something that will be more effective in terms of stopping reoffending. And that's the challenge that we face. And the interim report has looked at what's happened over the last 30 years or so. And what we can see is a clear move towards longer sentences, but not enough focus on reducing reoffending.
But you've been in charge before. You know how it is for politicians. You were Justice Secretary, weren't you, under one of the previous Tory governments. You know why longer sentences work. It's what's demanded in the polls by voters.
I accept that long sentences tend to be popular, but I think the most important thing for the electorate is doing everything we possibly can to reduce crime. And that, I think, does have to be the focus. And what we've seen, and you mentioned, Chris, a moment or so ago, that we've seen early releases. The truth is the government had no choice but to do that because we were about to run out of capacity. And on current projections, we're going to run out of capacity again. And I don't think we want to see emergency releases. What you have to do is ensure that your sentencing policy is consistent with your prison capacity and ensure that we spend money as effectively as possible to ensure that people don't commit further crimes. And the public really wants to see those crimes come down. We want to see lower levels of crime. We want to see fewer victims. And actually, there are better ways in which we can spend resources than just endlessly building more prison places.
So it's about educating voters that you can't lock everyone up all the time for long periods. I mean, but you must have met victims of crime in your time in politics.
Of course.
So what would you say to them? Because those are the people, I think, who will be in the papers as soon as you start releasing or not locking up rapists, murderers and the like for as long as they should be locked up in the past. They'll be saying, well, why are you soft on crime to Labour?
Look, I think one of the difficulties is that victims are let down if we're forced into emergency releases. I think there is a case of being more transparent so that victims understand precisely what is going to happen. We need to make sure that victims are properly informed of what's going on. But I think the view of most victims is what they were in the position that they were put in. They want to see crime come down. And as I say, I completely understand the desire that, we must always, if there's a terrible crime that happens, we must always lengthen the sentence and so on. I completely understand the public attitude on that. But as I say, we've got some quite tough choices as a country, and the government is going to have to take some tough choices here. And as I say, money spent on building new prisons and maintaining those prisons and so on, that is really expensive. I don't see anyone rushing forward to say they want to pay more taxes because they want to fund the justice system by more. But what you can do is rehabilitate. And there are some jurisdictions like Texas, for example.
Yes.
No one would accuse Texas of being a soft touch. But they found that their prisons were full, and then they took action to essentially reward good behavior for prisoners who were on long sentences, who had committed serious crimes. But if they behaved, stuck by the prison rules, that they worked, they did the courses, etc., that they would be released earlier. And do you know what's happened in the time where they have substantially reduced their prison population? Crime in Texas has fallen substantially as well. And, it is worth looking at other places where this has happened. It's worked and it's contributed towards reducing crime.
Look, David Gauke, thanks for coming on tonight. And when's your full report out?
In the spring. We don't have a precise date, but you're not going to have too long to wait.
Make sure you come back on GBNews to explain the full findings when it comes out. Thank you for joining us tonight on State of the Nation. With me now in the studio at GBNews is former editor of The Sun newspaper, Kelvin MacKenzie, and a former Labour Party special advisor, Matthew Larser. Kelvin MacKenzie, to you first. What's happening here is David Gauke is saying, educate the public, long sentences don't work, but it's opening up Labour to be accused of being soft on crime.
Right, let's face it. David Gauke is closer to Labour than he is to the Conservative Party. He was chosen to do this report because he would come out with this kind of old claptrap. The reason that we have more people in jail for longer periods is there are some very nasty people out there. Nightlife in London has basically collapsed. Why? Because London is a very dangerous place to be late at night now, right? In a way that it wasn't. The idea that in some odd way, if we give less of a sentence to people who have no necessary legitimacy in our country, nor cultural connection with it, actually is ridiculous. So Gauke's report will come and go, it'll disappear. And what will happen in 20 years' time, if we were all here, probably unlikely in my case, in 20 years' time, that number will have doubled from 80,000 to 160,000, and we'll have more prisons, and good. We need people to go away for long periods. There are some vile people out there, and I don't think this kind of softly approach will ever work with a certain kind of person.
Well, Kelvin MacKenzie, thank you for that. Matthew Larser, you heard from Kelvin here, former editor of The Sun. It's almost unsellable what David Gauke is offering here, or can we be convinced that longer jail terms don't work? It's a big risk for Labour, isn't it?
Well, I think actually one of the interesting things he was saying is it's not necessarily that longer terms don't work, it's often the shorter terms don't work. 6 out of 10 people who are sent to jail for a year or under re-offend. So I think you're absolutely right, Kelvin. Nobody would dispute there are some absolutely vile people out there. Every day we see headlines with crimes that shock us all, and they must have long sentences and they must serve those sentences. And what we can't have is the crazy system at the moment with the emergency releases. Well, I think pretty much any sensible person agrees Labour didn't have much choice because there weren't any places available. They are building new prison places. It's not like they're trying to cut prison places, but you need to focus on reoffending, particularly for those on shorter sentences who are not an immediate threat to the public. But absolutely, you're always going to need people who are locked up for a decent time.
I mean, Calvin Mackenzie, you heard David Gordon mention Texas there. I mean, Texas is known for its prisons full of high security prisons, but actually he was saying there that rewarding prisoners, give them a reason not to reoffend, they get out early.
OK, right. Well, I don't agree with that. And
it may be true. They may not agree, but maybe
he may have found one place in the world where it's working. But the truth about the matter is they're already actually, once you get over 4 years, you're already getting a 50% discount. And actually now under Labour, basically you get a Christmas hamper and told God bless you and a free flat for 10 years.
That's not
quite true, Calvin. Not quite the case.
Right, in a sense, what David Gordon is, it might work if he can carry the public with him.
Yeah.
But can you imagine, it's another battle for the Labour Justice team?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, it is very hard to bring people with you in terms of sending fewer people to prison. But I think what you need to do is concentrate on those who really should be serving sentences, actually serving their sentences. You're not seeing the ridiculous 60 and 80% discount, as it were, as they call it in the lingo, where people serve such a short percentage of their sentences. That's what drives people mad. I think what we need to do is try and be as effective as possible, because the ultimate thing you want to do, and the ultimate thing politicians will be judged on, is whether crime goes down.
Talking about that, I know a guy, right, I happen to know him, who got 9 years for drugs. Do you know what? In the end of the day, I won't go into the way it was cut down. Eventually he did 3 years, of which the last 18 months was he was out at 7 in the morning and back at 7, and was even allowed...
That could be an issue, though, of lack of places, couldn't it, more than anything else?
Well, I don't know what it was, but whatever it was not a 9-year sentence. So when you read online or wherever you read it, anybody that says they've got 14 years, if you're lucky, they'll have done about 5 or 6.
And that's got to stop, because people who give sentences like that need to serve them. What you can't have is this conveyor belt of people in for a year if it doesn't work, and if community sentences for these more minor offences can work, to free up those places for the bad guys.
When you say minor offences, sometimes it might be ABH or GBH. If you were the person that got a monkey wrench over your head, you are wanting that person to get 5 to 6 years. I do not want them to start getting 24 months,
and
honestly.
If you're a victim, you feel it can damage your life forever.
Absolutely, and nobody takes that away. But the ultimate thing is we need to get crime down and reoffending. But I agree with Kelvin, we've got to sort out the issue of foreign prisoners, which is a huge issue in terms of returning people back to their country of origin.
Thanks to my panel tonight, Calvin Mackenzie, Matthew Larser. After the break, I'll be asking the Shadow Defence Minister, Mark Francois, whether British troops should be deployed in Ukraine amidst Donald Trump's controversial peace deal. Stay tuned.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Aaron McLean, the goal machine here, used to play for Peterborough United. You bagged loads of goals for them back in the day. But I've got a bone to pick with you, young man. You scored at the City ground against Nottingham Forest for, was it Hull City?
For Hull City, yeah.
Why did you do that?
Well, that was my job, unfortunately. I must say, that was actually one of my favourite goals.
Was it really?
Because I remember, obviously, playing at the City ground, unbelievable stadium, historic.
It is great.
So, and we beat you 1-0.
OK, no need to rub it in. These sports clubs, whether it's football or rugby or whatever, should offer two alternatives, either a professional footballer, or if you don't quite make it, you can still go and play football at a lower level, but have a career as well, maybe be an electrician or a plumber.
100%. You know, listen, I've had multiple conversations with various different people, whether it's the PFA or whether it's clubs. Even players who do have careers, you know, there's so many that don't make it and don't quite make it to the level or only play at a lower level. there's so many that do have long careers, but once you come to the end of that, you've spent, you know, for me, I spent 20 years as a professional footballer. Once I finished playing, what do you then do for the rest of your life? You know, at 35, once you retire, you still have to have a purpose in life. But I'd almost be starting from ground zero. I'm fortunate that I went into coaching and then went into the media.
That's good.
But for every one of me, there's hundreds that don't. And I've got so many friends who, I've got to say, you know, have really, really struggled on the, you know, mental health side.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually, because you go from, like, playing in stadiums, big stadiums, small stadiums, crowds, singing your name, and all that sort of stuff, that adulation, the buzz of winning games, and you know, the downs of losing games, and you go from that to sort of nothing when you finish. I mean, that's a big come down area.
It's a huge come down.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Christopher Hope. Now, today, Ukrainian President Zelensky criticised the Saudi-based US-Russian peace talks for sidelining Ukraine, while the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio disputed the idea that anyone was being excluded. But the question many have been asking in the UK is whether the UK Army, the British Army, is in any state to be used as a peacekeeping force, following the Prime Minister's suggestion of just such a plan. I'm joined now in the studio here in GB News' Westminster studio by Shadow Defence Minister Mark Francois. Mark, great to have you on the channel and here.
Thanks for having me.
Should the UK put boots on the ground in Ukraine to keep the peace?
Well, there's one important point of principle to make first, and then I'll come directly on to your question. These negotiations should involve the Ukrainians. They should not be excluded. They clearly were not in the room. And after everything that Ukraine has been through, it's almost exactly 3 years now since the invasion. It's not right to have negotiations about the future of their country above their head.
That's the great powers carving up Europe, isn't it?
They should be in the room, not least because any settlement that might be agreed between Trump and Putin isn't going to work unless the Ukrainians are on board for it.
I think we agree on that then, of course. What's your solution to keeping the peace? I mean, under what flag would international troops be deployed in eastern Ukraine? NATO, EU, UN?
Well, we need, in a sense, Chopper, it's too early to say because you don't know what the final outlook of any deal is. And again, it would have to have Ukrainian support. Once you know what that is, you can get in to designing some kind of force to help maintain it. But until you know the actual parameters of any agreement, you're putting the cart before the horse. I mean, I think we in the opposition would be open-minded about the potential of deploying some British troops, but you need to know how many, where, for how long, and what exactly is the mission. So there's a whole lot of questions.
And can we do it? I mean, Richard Dannett has said we haven't got the numbers of troops to do a rotation. We've got to do a deployment.
It would depend how many you were deploying and how often you were rotating them. So I'm not trying to avoid your question in any way, but it would all depend on the structure and nature of the deal and then what other countries wanted to contribute. One important point, though, in terms of some Americans saying, you know, that NATO Europe hasn't stepped up and done enough. For the record, Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, the famous clause that says an attack on one is treated as an attack on all, has only ever been invoked once. And it was invoked by the United States in 2001 after 9/11. When nearly 4,000 Americans and some Brits that were working in the Twin Towers...
More than some Brits, yeah. I think
But people at Cantor Fitzgerald and other companies that were murdered And Bush, rightfully, in my view, invoked Article 5 and said the United States has been attacked. And European NATO nations, particularly the UK, came to their aid within a few weeks. You had British Special Forces with American Special Forces and Australians, interestingly, you know, fighting and killing terrorists in the caves of Bora Bora. So for the record, the one time Article 5 was invoked for real, it was by the States, and the Brits turned up within weeks.
Yes, we can see that, can't we? Now, what's your take on a vote in Parliament? Should there be a veto by MPs on any deployment of UK troops in Ukraine as part of a deal?
Well, again, Chopper, I mean, whenever we used to debate European matters, which we did frequently, you'd say to me, are you going to vote for X or Y? And I would say, I need to read the small print first. So it's a bit like that. You'd need to understand exactly what the ask is. But one thing, again, I'll say, if I may, Lavrov, as I understand it, the Russian foreign minister, and by the way, he's been doing that job for nearly 2 decades. He's a survivor, right?
Yeah.
So he said today that it would be unacceptable to Russia for Western troops to be deployed into Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's not his decision. If the Ukrainians asked for Western troops to be deployed into their country, if we knew what the mission was, Russia should not have a veto on that. It's not down to them to decide.
The reported terms of the deal look brutal for Ukraine, turning it into essentially an economic colony. Is that a deal which you would sign up to?
Well, we don't... Again,
I know. You're being very political, Mark Francois. I'm not used to it.
I should go into politics. Maybe I should consider a career in that. But no, seriously, we need to know what it is. But again, one thing I will say, if you like, from the heart, right? I've been wearing this badge for 3 years. Right? I didn't put it on to come on tonight. Right? So there was a famous British admiral in World War I called Admiral Sir Jackie Fisher. He was the first Sea Lord. And he famously said, ultimately, all nations desire peace, but peace on their terms. Whatever these negotiations lead to, we cannot allow peace on Putin's terms.
I've got to ask you about a speech that your leader gave, Kemi Badenoch, this week. She said that nearly 40% of fighting-age Brits wouldn't fight for our country under any circumstances. Why is that? You've been in charge for 14 years. Your party has failed to instil patriotism or willing to fight for your country amongst 4 in 10 fighting-age Brits.
Look, I saw that. I think she was quoting a poll that was done. But my answer to that is, in 1936, at the Oxford Union, there was a famous debate. It became known thereafter as the Oxford Union debate, where the students at the Oxford Union voted by well over 2 to 1 for a motion that said this House would not fight for king and country. Right? This is when appeasement was at its height, all the horrors of the First World War. 3 years later, thousands of students at Oxford flocked to join the army to fight Hitler and Nazi Germany. So there's an occasion where within 3 years public opinion...
What's that teach you?
Well, I think what it teaches me that when the chips were really down, young people in this country, if you like, rallied to the colours, and I hope and believe that if it ever happened again, they would do so again. I wouldn't read too much into one opinion poll.
This was quoted by your leader.
Well, no. But she quoted it, but it wasn't her poll.
Mark Francois, thank you for joining us tonight on GB News. In a moment, we'll be assessing the asylum row between the country's top judge and the Prime Minister. Stay tuned. Plus, stick around if you want to hear how much your energy bills might go up by next week.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean all clear skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
A brisk wind continues to blow over the Canaries, but it will be easing as we head through the latter part of this week. Still a few showers across Spain and Portugal. They will also be fading. Much of the east coast of Spain seeing plenty of sunshine along with the Balearics and Sardinia, but a few scattered showers over southern parts of mainland Italy, and looking fairly showery in Greece once more. And with the winds coming down from the north, it is chilly and, if anything, getting colder in Santorini through the rest of this week. Goodbye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Big changes on the way for the UK's weather during the next 24 hours. It's dry for most at first with clear spells and chilly at first, but then it turns much milder through Wednesday night and into Thursday as Atlantic-driven weather starts to arrive. That weather will turn things more unsettled, but also much less cold compared with recent weather. We've still got the cold air in place though on Tuesday nights and certainly through Wednesday morning with some clear spells, and where we've got some shelter from the wind there'll be a patchy frost to wake up to across central and eastern parts of the UK. A bright start though for many. However, the southwest, South Wales, parts of Northern Ireland we'll see a milder start to the day. Certainly for Cornwall, it's very mild to begin things, but it's also wet as a band of heavy rain moves through. That's pushing into Devon, Somerset, Dorset by 7 a.m, into Wales at this stage as well as Northern Ireland. It's accompanied by a strengthening wind, and that wind will affect much of the UK. It will also tend to thicken up the cloud through Scotland with a few spots of light rain around first thing Wednesday. But the brightest skies will be through the Midlands, the east and southeast of England, where there will be some glimmers of sunlight through the morning and early afternoon before this system moves eastwards. That's going to bring thicker cloud and some light rain and drizzle, but it tends to peter out by the afternoon. Brighter skies for a time towards the southwest, and it's in the southwest where we're going to see that mild air make inroads. 13 Celsius, for example, in Exeter, whilst it stays just 5 or 6 across eastern parts of the country. But by Thursday, we're all in the mild air, and that means a frost-free start to the day, but it's also going to be a very lively start with strong winds and heavy rain, even some thunderstorms around. The wettest weather first thing in the north and west, that clears east. Some brighter skies follow, but the weather's going to be very unsettled, very changeable through Friday and the weekend. Further rain and strong winds at times, but mild with it as well.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, in an unusual intervention, the head of the Judiciary, the Lady Chief Justice Baroness Carr, has taken a swipe at both Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch, following an exchange last week at Prime Minister's Questions in which both leaders criticised the judicial decision to allow Gazans to be granted asylum in the UK under laws intended for Ukrainians. So is this a case of judicial overreach? I'm joined now by the legal analyst Joshua Rosenberg. Joshua, thank you for joining us tonight on GB News. Great to see you again. What on earth is the Lady Chief Justice talking about? Why is she getting involved in politics? It never ends well, does it?
She's not getting involved in politics. It's the politicians who are getting involved in the judgments of the courts. And she's telling them that she doesn't interfere with their concerns, just as she didn't comment today at her news conference about sentencing plans, David Gauke's review, you were talking to him earlier, or forthcoming policies in terms of the criminal justice system. And she doesn't want them to belittle, to undermine the judges, except, of course, if they wish to appeal against a judgment of the courts, which, in this case, it doesn't appear that the Home Secretary is willing to do.
So is she saying, you now can't talk about a ruling in court in Parliament? Is that a kind of ruling from the Lady Chief Justice?
It's certainly not a ruling, and she's certainly not saying you can't talk about decisions of the courts. And
that's all they were doing, though.
Parliament has its own rules. No, it's not. What both Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer did last week was to say that the decision of the upper tribunal was wrong. And they were wrong in many ways. First of all, Kemi Badenoch was wrong to imply that the Gazan family had been allowed to enter the UK on the basis of a scheme intended for Ukrainians. She knows perfectly well that they were granted permission to come to the UK on the basis of Article 8 of the Human Rights Convention. You may criticise that, but it's nothing to do with Ukrainians. She was also wrong to deny the family's applications were made while the Conservatives were in government. They did indeed apply to the Home Office before the last election. And Keir Starmer was wrong to describe the judgment as a legal loophole that he implied the Home Secretary was trying to fill, when, of course, as you know very well, he's utterly committed to the Human Rights Convention and the Human Rights Act, which makes it enforceable in the United Kingdom.
But can't you have that debate in Parliament without the Lady Chief Justice taking offence at discussing? I mean, it's not undermining what she's up to. They're merely debating, albeit if you say wrongly, a loophole that they see in the law. Is that not allowed anymore, according to Banner's
First of all, as
rules?
I say, what she was really concerned about was that both these politicians hadn't taken the trouble on Wednesday of last week to read this judgment. Now, it is 50 pages long, but they do have staff who could read it and tell them that it was nothing to do with Ukrainians. It may be wrong, in which case the Home Office would appeal. Perhaps they think they might lose, in which case it wouldn't do them any good, on the contrary. But it's perfectly okay for government ministers to say, we don't like this decision, we're going to appeal against it. Perfectly all right to tell MPs that. But once you start undermining it, then you are putting the judges in a very difficult position. They can't answer back. Even the Lady Chief Justice can't really answer back on their behalf.
Joshua Roseberg, thank you for explaining the case for the Lady Chief Justice. Thank you for joining us tonight on GBNews State of the Nation. We've been now in the studio is former editor of The Sun, Calvin McKenzie, and the former Labour Party Special Advisor, Matthew Larzer. Matthew Larzer, to you first. You heard there the kind of explanation that she was basically defending other judges. I mean, is she trying to shut down political debate about rulings no one agrees with, or some don't agree with?
Look, I think it's a narrow line. I mean, remember in Brexit when we had the front page of the Daily Mail saying enemies of the people? I think castigating the entire judicial system is wrong.
But they weren't.
But I don't think they were, and I think that she has to. I think she may have got the wrong side of that line today. It is perfectly legitimate. It's fine to point out when politicians get their facts wrong, but we have a particular issue at the moment about the interpretation of human rights law, which, frankly, one of the great mysteries of this is even if the Tories were to put in place the British Bill of Rights, which they can't decide whether they want or not, but if they did go for that and to withdraw from the ECHR, it's all about how the judges interpret it, and that's a perfectly legitimate source of debate for me.
Calvin McKenzie, Joshua Rosenberg is right. The application was refused, but allowed under European Convention of Human Rights law.
Right, which is the point, really. So this was really, this is where Starmer was being, as ever, wholly deceitful, because he knew that.
That's not fair.
He knew that. He knew this was an ECHR decision, and actually, so he claimed that there had been a loophole. They will never close that loophole. He will never throw that out.
They say tonight they will close that loophole.
Right,
Calvin.
well, it may, but that will have nothing to do with that Gazan family coming in. They could have still come in under the straight ECHR route. And the other issue that has to be faced is there has been a series of shocking first-level tribunal decisions involving ECHR, which has got the nation absolutely upset. For instance, the Albanian criminal allowed to stay because his kid didn't like Albanian chicken nuggets. That kind of thing, but much more serious ones, like paedophiles allowed to stay because they thought it would create more harm for their own family children. So actually, funnily enough, all that emerged in that was the deceit of Starmer attacking that, rather than I rather rate Kemi Badenoch's reaction. Actually, to be honest, I don't say that very often.
Yes or no? Should we leave the ECHR, Calvin?
We have to leave it. It's not we should leave it. We have to.
Matthew
leave it.
Larson, all roads lead back to ECHR.
Absolutely. No, but we need to look at how British judges are interpreting it, and that's a debate that the judiciary's got to be part of.
It's a problem, isn't it? The rights to have a family life, whatever the rules were here.
I don't want these kinds of people to have a family life. I couldn't give a damn about them. I don't necessarily want them here as criminals, and I definitely don't want them to start playing up, oh, I'm a nice daddy, and then some idiot judge saying, oh, I'm sorry.
Matthew Larson.
The thing is, every other country in Europe is a member of the ECHR, and you don't have situations like this because it's how your judges interpret it.
So is the problem?
I don't think you could see in France that people weren't being sent home because of chicken nuggets. So I think we have to look at how judges are interpreting it, because whatever framework of law you have...
Why is it our judges are so poor they can't apply common sense as well as the law?
Well, in this case, the first one did, and actually he then appealed it, and it was the the second-level tribunal, who overturned the decision.
Isn't there a broader issue here, both of you two, that these rulings you mentioned there, Kelvin, the chicken nuggets ruling, this one about the Gazan family, it undermines confidence in our system.
I would say give credit to the Telegraph, because they have been producing these stories day after day. Where would we be without the journalism? I don't see the courts advertising it. They're keeping very quiet. Some of the judgments have been absolutely ridiculous. What about the guy who said the Jamaican who should have been shipped out, wasn't shipped out, and he said, I'm going to carry on smoking cannabis. He was a drug dealer, and regardless of whether I stay here or leave here, I'm going to carry on.
What is Labour's answer to this?
Well, I agree with you, Chris, that I think that the issue is that judgments like this push the whole idea of human rights law into disrepute. They lose public support for it, and you get into a situation where people are calling for the whole framework to be swept away. So, every judge, whether it's said in Parliament or not, who's making these decisions, needs to actually get common sense up.
We want our leaders to be, quotes, on the voters' side. Right? Yes. There are enough lawyers making a lot of money, as Lord Hermer has managed to line his own pocket by supporting Jerry Adams for 30,000.
That's a whole...
Right. All I'm saying is there's a load of lawyers making a lot of money, right? Who speaks for us in all this? So the
government's got to make sure it does.
Yes,
okay.
Although Starmer was being deceived.
No, well, they do say they want Parliament, not courts, to set the laws. They're number 10, but
Well, I'm not against that. But Starmer, is he going to throw out?
You'll like this one, Calvin. Another news, it has emerged. Energy bills could be on the brink of increasing by £100 a year following a rise in wholesale gas prices. The Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, has urged Ofgem to protect consumers and double down on plans to decarbonise the grid as a means of lowering prices. Back to the panel. Ed Miliband, Kelvin Mackenzie, next week we might see energy prices going up, the cap going up by £100. Do you believe in this net zero target? Can it bring down bills as they talk about the election?
At the moment, our electricity bills are 2.5 times the size of Germany's and 4 times the size of America's, because we are, quotes, trying to bring down the price of energy. It's not working.
You've got grandchildren. We're doing it for them, aren't we? We're doing it for the next generation.
Do you know what? I couldn't give a damn about my grandchildren. Then get on with it. I've got enough problems of my own.
Do they get a Christmas present, Kelvin?
I'm not watching, Kevin.
They would get a Christmas present, but thanks to the energy prices, that has to go to them.
Oh, Kelvin.
Moving on from Kelvin's family, briefly, though.
Look, I think the government has got to make sure that the green agenda actually is about making electricity cheaper again. I actually was in a conversation with a senior figure in the energy industry yesterday who was desperate, who wants to bring down energy prices, but you need to do the right things in terms of decarbonising. I worry that he is my old boss.
Rishi Sunak get this right? He wanted to do it in a kind of pragmatic way, not a kind of an all-cost way.
The government would argue that they're trying to do the same thing. The actual reason that the £100 is because there's an actual issue with Europe's gas storage. There isn't enough liquefied natural gas across the continent, so the markets are pushing the prices up by what we've seen. But Ed Miliband's got to make sure he's seen us on the side of consumers, not on the side of the green zealots.
Look, first of all, let's get our prices down.
Yeah.
Let's start until the moment we have enough wind and we have enough everything else, right? Let's supply the oil and gas that this country needs. We've got loads of it, and in fact, they won't even give the go-ahead to those. And they've now got the judges involved, now saying, what are you going to emit before we can grant drilling? Honestly, we can expect to go skint before we get to net zero. We will be net. We'll be net of any money. That's what we'll be net of.
Matthew Larsley, what Kelvin is saying is what many say, it's harming the country, this policy of net zero.
Constantly increasing electricity prices are harming the country. What we need to do is make sensible decisions. And so, yes, I think the government has a choice. If it's a choice between, do we want to be purer than pure but import foreign gas, which we don't get tax revenue from, and is actually less environmentally friendly, that's daft. So we need a common sense approach.
seems
the government,
like
and Starmer needs to make sure that Miliband
it seems like we're virtue signalling to the world, and at the expense of people here with bills and hurting industry.
I agree. Yes, we must move towards renewables, but we cannot be importing foreign gas and not exploiting our own resources. That's just daft, and the government needs to make sure it doesn't do that. That's why this decision, as Kelvin says, that's now been pushed back by the court into the government's path on the Rosebank oil field. The government's got to come down in the favour of actually letting it go ahead, whatever Miliband says.
Right. It's Starmer's fault. Miliband is a net zero nutter, and we've put him in charge of the sweet shop. We are in great danger. What he should do, it'll either happen now or it's going to happen in a year's time. He's going to be fired. The thing is a nightmare.
Thanks to my panel. A heated debate there about lots of hot air, but thank you for joining us both in the studio. In a moment, as the Reform Party surges in the polls and widens its lead, I'll be speaking to a top South African business person who has thrown his support behind Nigel Farage. Don't go away.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Coldplay?
Coldplay. It was
Steve Martin, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They did a gig.
Chris Martin. Chris Martin.
Have they apologised for being British?
Yeah, they were
They did,
on
yes.
Patrick Christie's programme, I think, last night, weren't they?
Yeah, he was saying...
The clip was, they said they were playing in India somewhere, and they said, thank you very much for a wonderful reception. We almost didn't expect it, and they sort of apologised for being British.
Thanks for welcoming us despite being British.
Yeah, that's right.
No. I mean, that's a disgrace.
Yes, it is.
I mean, that's absolutely terrible. Why can't we be proud to be British?
It's becoming the norm to feel that you have to apologise all the time for being British, and I think that's wrong.
I think Bono did it about 20, 30 years ago when he was touring with U2, didn't he?
Well, stop it. Let's be proud.
He sang a song.
We've got a lot to be proud of in this country, and it's wrong to make it, and especially if it probably is filtering down to our children.
Yeah.
This feeling that you've got to apologise for being British, for heaven's sake.
Well, it's back to that old image, isn't it, of an England flag being viewed, someone flying an England flag, and you sort of tut and raise your eyebrows at it, which is just so wrong. You don't get that with any other flag, do you? That we're just meant to be embarrassed by it all.
Yeah, we've got to stop that. We really have.
Yeah, love being British. Wouldn't want to be anything else. Thanks very much.
No,
indeed.
I like being British.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point.
He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Now, the Reform UK party continues to enjoy its lead in the opinion polls as a new YouGov survey puts Nigel Farage's party 2 points ahead of Labour at 27 points to Labour's 25 points. Meanwhile, the Tories remain stuck 6 points behind at 21%, which has given ammunition to Reform UK's argument that they are the new opposition to the Labour government. With this sort of a momentum, could we see a domino effect of defections from the Tories to Reform? Well, I'm joined now by South African African businessman and New Reform Party donor Rob Hershoff. Rob, before we go to South Africa, briefly on Reform UK, you've donated to Reform. You were a former Conservative supporter, maybe even a donor. I think you were a donor to the Tories. What made you jump ship?
So I lived in London, I lived in the UK for 25 years, and I was always a Conservative Party member and donor and supporter, and I really believed in them. And a year or so ago, I gave up on them. 14 years in power, and they delivered nothing.
So while they were in power, you gave up on them, before the election?
Correct. Because at the end of the day, they delivered nothing in the form of what I believe is true conservatism.
What do you believe that is?
I think it's traditional values. It's not moving into these new woke areas too quickly. It's reviewing things, and it's the Judeo-Christian basis of civilization. It's what made this world great, and it started here.
It's being pragmatic and wanting power. That's why the Tories have been so successful, really.
Correct.
They've not been that principled on things, just power is what matters.
Exactly, and Boris Johnson was supposed to be the great white hope with the white hair.
Yes.
And he did nothing. He became a climate change activist, and he actually accelerated the evil mind woke virus in this
But aren't
country.
Reform UK offering simple solutions to complex problems?
Correct.
Yes, but that's what I mean. Impossible to do if you get into office. I mean, they're able to do it, having never been in power at all.
So Trump's been able to do it on day one with his 100 hours, his executive orders. And I think the Trump of the UK is Nigel Farage.
There's a lesson to be learned, a read across from what Trump's up to with what Farage can do here. But, of course, Trump tunnelled into the Republicans, didn't he? Farage is trying to do it outside of the main party, the main right-wing party.
And I know, and everyone's talking about Farage being the true Conservative with Conservative values, and he's going to pull the Tories to the right, and that's probably a good thing. And who knows, maybe there'd be a merger of the two.
Do you think there might be? Have you heard about it?
I haven't heard about it. But Jordan Peterson did say so today, and he said it would be a good thing.
Did he? Well, the talk on the street is of the right coming together under one flag.
And I think why? The Tories have a big bench. They have a lot of very good people. And, Nigel has not yet announced his bench. He's got some good people, but he doesn't
We don't know who his bench are. There are only 5 MPs. We don't even know who his welfare secretary is, culture, home. We don't know who anyone is. I mean, and that's kind of alarming, isn't it? Wasn't the UK normally have an opposition that could slide into power if they have to?
And I mean, one move would be that some of the big gorillas of the Tory party move to Reform, or Reform merges with the Tories. But either way, that would be a good thing for the UK.
You live in South Africa. You're worried about that country, aren't you?
It's on the edge of the abyss.
Now, why is that?
The world seems to be swinging against the woke, the left, the madness of the Greens. But South Africa's going the other way. And a week ago, our president, Cyril Ramaphosa of the African National Congress, the ANC, signed into law expropriation without compensation.
What does that mean?
It means that they can take any property, not just land, they can take any property without compensation from anyone in the country. And if you want to scare away foreign direct investment, you sign a bill, sign into law expropriation without compensation.
Is that happening now then?
Madness.
Is money fleeing South Africa?
It has been for the last 10, 15 years, but it's an acceleration now. And Trump announced 10 days ago that he's had enough of South Africa and he's going to turn his blowtorch or baseball bat onto South Africa, and that's a good thing.
Well, it doesn't need... I mean, that's a bully boy tactic, isn't it? I mean, South Africa needs everyone's support. It's been through a lot politically over the past decades.
It needs a bully boy tactic because the ANC government is destroying the country. In 30 years...
So for viewers who are not aware of the politics, the one party's been in power for 30 years now.
In 1994, apartheid ended, we had democratic elections, and the ANC, the African National Congress, was voted into power. They've been in control of the country for 30 years. All of our state-owned enterprises are bankrupt, and in every single metric, employment, health, education, we've gone backwards. They're a disaster, and it's not going to be fixed internally.
So what is the solution? I mean, democracy, this government has been voted in for 30 years. Do you want a new party set up to take him on?
In 2024,
a Trump figure to be...
We desperately need that. In 2024, the national election, the ANC fell below 50% for the first time, 41%, and formed not even a coalition, a combined government with the other parties, the non-hardcore left parties. But that government is going nowhere, this GNU government.
So it's a reminder, it's a reminder, isn't it, that we think we obsess about Trump and Musk in this country, but of course he's having effects across the world.
Well, I'm hoping he'll have a very positive effect on South Africa because we need help.
Yeah, and how will you get that? Will there be a Trump figure? Have you thought one in mind? You might.
I have one in mind. He actually appeared on GB a few months ago.
Right, who is he?
His name's Gayton McKenzie.
Right, he's the one to watch, isn't he?
He's the one to watch.
Is ANC left-wing, right-wing? How would you just describe it in terms of UK politics?
Kleptocratic, ineptocratic, trained by the Soviets, socialist.
What does that make them then?
That makes them left. But we've got worse. We've got hard left in the EFF and MK, who are publicly saying, kill the whites, kill the farmers. It's bad. South Africa's in bad shape.
But of course, we have lots of people. We think fondly of South Africa. I think there are connections with that country. So we will wish it well from here. I mean, and it can will it be able to fight back from this?
Who knows? Who knows? We need you to ride to the rescue, but I think Trump is riding to the rescue. We'll see.
Well, Rob Hersov, thank you for joining us tonight on State of the Nation. Rob has been attending the conference the ARC conference in central London. Members of the ARC Advisory Board include investors in GB News. Thank you, Rob, for coming on tonight. We do appreciate it. Up next is Patrick Christis. Patrick, what's on your show this evening?
Well, I've got loads on tonight, Christopher. 4 more years of migrant hotels. Can the British public really tolerate that? Keir Starmer humiliated by members of the EU over Ukraine. The BBC accused of doing Hamas propaganda. We've got the man who blew the lid off that story live on my show. Meghan Markle has been forced to relaunch a brand that she barely launched to begin with. And actually, as long as immigration tribunal judges continue to make, in my view, complete lunatic decisions, should we not be able to criticise them? Well, not according to the Lady Chief Justice. All that and much, much more, as well as a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages, Chopper.
Splendid, Patrick. That sounds fantastic. I'll be tuning in. And that's all for the State of the Nation today. You've learned a lot about Kelvin McKenzie's family, but stay tuned with more news on that, perhaps in the future. That's all coming up after the weather. Matthew Goodin's back tomorrow. I'm Christopher Hope, and this has been State of the Nation. Thanks for joining us.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Big changes on the way for the UK's weather during the next 24 hours. It's dry for most at first with clear spells and chilly at first, but then it turns much milder through Wednesday night and into Thursday as Atlantic-driven weather starts to arrive. That weather will turn things more unsettled, but also much, much less cold compared with recent weather. We've still got the cold air in place, though, on Tuesday nights and certainly through Wednesday morning with some clear spells and where we've got some shelter from the wind. There'll be a patchy frost to wake up to across central and eastern parts of the UK. A bright start, though, for many. However, the southwest, South Wales, parts of Northern Ireland, we'll see a milder start to the day. Certainly for Cornwall, it's very mild to begin things, but it's also wet as a band of heavy rain moves through. That's pushing into Devon, Somerset, Dorset by 7 a.m, into Wales at this stage as well as Northern Ireland. It's accompanied by a strengthening wind, and that wind will affect much of the UK. It will also tend to thicken up the cloud through Scotland with a few spots of light rain around first thing Wednesday. But the brightest skies will be through the Midlands, the east and southeast of England, where there will be some glimmers of sunlight through the morning and early afternoon before this system moves eastwards. That's going to bring thicker cloud and some light rain and drizzle, but it tends to peter out by the afternoon. Brighter skies for a time towards the southwest, and it's in the southwest where we're going to see that mild air make inroads. 13 Celsius, for example, in Exeter, whilst it stays just 5 or 6 across eastern parts of the country. But by Thursday, we're all in the mild air, and that means a frost-free start to the day, but it's also going to be a very lively start with strong winds and heavy rain, even some thunderstorms around. The wettest weather first thing in the north and west, that clears east. Some brighter skies follow, but the weather's going to be very unsettled, very changeable through Friday and the weekend. Further rain and strong winds at times, but mild with it as well.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're giving you not one, but 2 chances to win this month, with 2 prize bundles that include an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash. But that's not all. You'll also get a brand new iPhone 16 and a £500 shopping voucher to spend at your favourite store. So why not be extra lucky this month for another chance to win Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 09